Before we start this video, I want to make one thing clear. This is not a list of hidden gems. This is not a list of things you've never heard of. This is the definitive ranking. 15 limited series that represent the absolute peak of what television is capable of when a story is given a beginning, a middle, and an end. No filler seasons, no renewal pressure, no story stretched past the point it was built to reach. Just the exact right amount of episodes to tell one complete, devastating, unforgettable story. Some of these will surprise you. Some of these you already know belong here. All 15 earned their place through pure, undeniable craft. So today, we're presenting you 15 miniseries, the best ever made, ranked. Let's go. Number 15, American Primeval. Let me open with the newest entry on this list, a brutal, unflinching 6-part series that arrived last year and immediately entered the conversation about the best of the genre.
What do you think's out there?
Your father.
Written by Mark L. Smith and directed entirely by Peter Berg, it is set in the Utah Territory in 1857, during the tense, violent standoff between Mormon settlers, the United States government, and Native American tribes that culminated in the real Mountain Meadows Massacre. Taylor Kitsch plays a mountain man raised by the Shoshone, and Betty Gilpin plays the fleeing mother. Both performances carry a specific, weathered exhaustion that never asks for easy sympathy. Berg shoots the violence in this series with a rawness that refuses to romanticize the frontier in any way. Brutal, sudden, and stripped of the mythic heroism most Westerns rely on. The production endured genuinely difficult filming conditions, including extreme cold, to capture the physical hardship the story depicts. Kim Coates, playing a settler leader with a fanatic's certainty, delivers one of the most unsettling performances of the year. The series became Netflix's most-watched show in the world within 2 weeks of release. It's brutal, visceral, and genuinely ambitious in how many perspectives it tries to hold at once. A worthy, unflinching opener for this list. Number 14, The Night Off. A Pakistani-American college student borrows his father's cab one night, picks up a woman he's never met, goes back to her apartment, and wakes up the next morning next to her dead body, with no memory of what happened.
I want to tell you something, and it's the most important thing you'll ever hear in your entire life.
Stephen Zaillian and Richard Price created The Night Of, and across 8 episodes, they build one of the most procedurally rigorous, most quietly devastating pieces of legal drama ever made. A series more interested in the machinery of the American criminal justice system than in the whodunit mechanics its premise suggests. Riz Ahmed plays Naz, with a performance that tracks his transformation across the series with genuine horror. John Turturro plays his defense attorney, a man with his own physical ailments and diminished expectations, who finds in this case something closer to genuine purpose than his career has offered him in years. Zaillian, who also wrote Schindler's List, brings the same patient, unflinching moral seriousness here. One of the finest limited series ever produced, still criminally underseen relative to how good it actually is. Number 13, Blackbird.
Dead.
Tell me there's a way out of this.
Not a quick one.
A charismatic, cocky drug dealer is sentenced to 10 years in prison. The FBI offers him a deal: transfer to a maximum security facility for the criminally insane, befriend a suspected serial killer, get him to confess to where he buried his victims before his appeal succeeds and he walks free. Dennis Lehane created Blackbird from James Keene's own memoir, and across 6 episodes, what he builds is one of the most tense two-hander character studies television has produced. A cat-and-mouse relationship between Keene, played by Taron Egerton, and Larry Hall, the suspected killer of 18 young girls, played by Paul Walter Hauser, in a performance of such complete, unsettling specificity that it remains one of the finest pieces of villain acting of the decade. Ray Liotta plays Keene's father in one of his final performances before his death. Heartbreaking and worth the 6 episodes on its own. The tension of Keene's mission, extracting a confession from a man who could do anything to him, in an environment where any misstep could end everything, is sustained with genuine, sweat-inducing precision across all 6 episodes. A tense, meticulously constructed true story that earned Hauser an Emmy nomination and remains one of the most purely gripping limited series of recent years. Number 12. Sharp Objects. Amy Adams plays Camille Preaker, a troubled journalist sent back to her small Missouri hometown to cover the murders of 2 young girls, forced to confront her own mother, her half-sister, and the trauma of her own adolescence in the process. Jean-Marc Vallée directed Sharp Objects from Gillian Flynn's novel, and what he builds across 8 episodes is one of the most formally audacious pieces of psychological drama ever made for television, using editing itself rather than dialogue to communicate trauma, memory, and the specific unreliability of a mind that has spent years defending itself against what actually happened. Amy Adams gives what may be the finest performance of her career as Camille, a woman whose self-destruction is visible in scars she keeps covered, in a controlled numbness that occasionally, devastatingly cracks. Patricia Clarkson plays her mother with a controlled, genteel menace that makes every scene between them feel like a held breath. The final episode's closing minutes recontextualize the entire series in a matter of seconds, one of the most quietly devastating final scene reveals in modern television. A masterclass in tone, structure, and psychological horror without a single conventional scare. Number 11. Unbelievable.
We're on the scene of a violent attack. Police say a masked assailant broke in while the victim was sleeping.
He said, "You need to be more protective of yourself."
In 2008, an 18-year-old woman reported that she had been raped in her apartment. Police doubted her account. Under pressure, she recanted. She was charged with filing a false report. She was telling the truth. Unbelievable is based on a Pulitzer Prize-winning piece of journalism, an unbelievable story of rape. Across 8 episodes, the series tells 2 parallel stories. The young woman whose report was disbelieved and who spent years living with the consequences of that disbelief, and years later, and in a different jurisdiction, 2 female detectives who begin connecting a series of assaults that reveal a serial predator operating across state lines. Kaitlyn Dever plays Marie with a devastating, controlled vulnerability. Toni Collette and Merritt Weaver play the 2 detectives, whose careful, respectful, genuinely competent investigative work stands in stark and deliberate contrast to the failures of the first investigation. What this show does that almost nothing else on Netflix does is refuse to sensationalize a single frame of violence. You never see the assaults, not once. Yet somehow it is one of the most gutting, urgent, quietly enraging things you will ever watch. Based on true events, meticulously, respectfully told. One of the finest pieces of television Netflix has ever produced. Number 10. The Haunting of Hill House.
What if I have a bad dream?
Well, I'm sure we can handle any dream you have.
What if I dream that you sent us away into the dark and we get hurt?
5 siblings grew up in a house that changed them permanently. A house they fled as children after something happened there that none of them have ever fully explained to each other, or to themselves. Decades later, one of them dies, and the surviving 4 are forced back together, and back toward Hill House, to finally confront what actually happened the night their family broke apart. Mike Flanagan created The Haunting of Hill House, loosely inspired by Shirley Jackson's novel, and across 10 episodes, he builds something genuinely rare in horror television. A ghost story that is, at its core, a devastating family drama about grief, addiction, and inherited trauma, in which the hauntings are never separate from the emotional damage. They are the emotional damage, made literal. The 6th episode, Two Storms, is built around several unbroken, continuous takes, running as long as 17 minutes each, moving fluidly between rooms, timelines, and years within a single unedited shot. One of the most technically ambitious achievements ever attempted in television directing. Flanagan also seeded the show with dozens of ghostly figures hidden in the background of ordinary scenes throughout the series, barely visible on a first watch, and part of what turned this into one of the most rewatched horror series ever made, with audiences combing back through episodes specifically to find them. A genuine reinvention of what a haunted house story could be, devastating as family drama, masterful as horror, and one of the most rewatched, most passionately discussed limited series of the last decade. Number 9. The Penguin.
America's a hustle.
Not that I'm complaining.
Colin Farrell plays Oswald Cobb, the character audiences first met in Matt Reeves' The Batman, now given his own 8-episode series charting his ruthless rise through Gotham's criminal underworld, in the power vacuum left after the events of that film. Moore and LaFranc created this HBO series, and what elevates The Penguin far above a standard comic book spin-off is its complete lack of interest in superhero spectacle. This is, structurally, a prestige crime drama in the tradition of The Sopranos or Boardwalk Empire, which happens to be set in Gotham City. Farrell, buried under hours of prosthetic makeup, delivers a performance built entirely on physicality and voice. A wounded, resentful, genuinely dangerous man whose rise is as tragic as it is horrifying. Kristen Milioti, as Sophia Falcone, matches him completely, in a performance that became one of the most acclaimed of the year. The show received widespread critical acclaim and multiple Emmy nominations, cementing it as one of the finest examples of prestige television built from comic book source material. Bleak, operatic, and one of the best surprises in recent television. Number 8. The Queen's Gambit.
Someday you're going to be all alone, so you need to figure out how to take care of yourself.
Anya Taylor-Joy plays Beth Harmon, an orphaned chess prodigy in 1950s and 60s America, battling addiction and the deeply male-dominated world of competitive chess, on her way to becoming the greatest player in the world. Scott Frank directed this 7-episode Netflix series, adapted from Walter Tevis's novel, and became the most watched limited series in television history, and single-handedly caused a global spike in chess set sales and chess club membership, a rare case of a television show measurably changing a hobby's cultural footprint overnight. The show makes chess itself feel genuinely cinematic and tense, through editing, sound design, and Taylor-Joy's performance, which conveys the intensity of a match without ever needing the audience to understand the specific moves being played. The production's meticulous period detail, and the way the show handles Beth's addiction without ever tipping into melodrama or simple redemption narrative, gives the series far more depth than its premise might suggest. Taylor-Joy became a global star off the back of this performance, a rare limited series that became a genuine, era-defining phenomenon. Number 7. Adolescence. This 4-episode British series following the arrest of a 13-year-old boy accused of murdering a female classmate, and the devastating ripple effects across his family, his school, and the community around him.
He's a good kid. Jamie, I want you to listen carefully.
Jack Thorne and Stephen Graham created Adolescence. Philip Barantini directed this, and every episode of the show was filmed in one continuous, unbroken take. No cuts, no edits, the camera moving fluidly through entire locations, and real time in a single unbroken shot. Owen Cooper, 13 years old and making his professional acting debut, plays Jamie Miller, and in the process became the youngest man in the history of the Emmy Awards to win one. Stephen Graham plays Jamie's father, carrying the show's final, unbearable episode almost entirely alone. Here's what makes Adolescence one of the most talked-about series of last year. The unbroken format isn't a gimmick. It removes any possibility of editorial distance, forcing you to sit inside every excruciating real-time moment, the interrogation, the confrontations, the raw devastation of a family trying to understand how this happened. Adolescence won 8 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Limited Series, and became the second most watched English-language series in Netflix's entire history. Number 6. Dopesick. The true story of how Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family triggered an opioid crisis that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. Michael Keaton plays a small-town Virginia doctor who begins prescribing OxyContin to his patients in good faith, unaware, at first, of the scale of the deception being run by Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family who own it. Danny Strong created this 8-episode Hulu series based on Beth Macy's nonfiction book and structures the story across multiple timelines and perspectives simultaneously. The doctor and his patients in Virginia, the DEA investigators building a case, and the Sackler family itself, engineering the marketing campaign that fueled the opioid crisis from the very top. Dopesick. Genuinely, meticulously interested in exactly how the crisis was manufactured, the specific language used by sales representatives, the falsified addiction statistics, the deliberate targeting of vulnerable communities, turning a systemic tragedy into something you can trace, decision by decision, back to the people responsible. Michael Keaton gives one of the finest performances of his career, who slowly curdles into horror as he watches his own patients and eventually himself become dependent on a drug he was told was safe. A meticulously researched, genuinely enraging piece of television. Essential viewing about a crisis most of America is still living through. Number 5. Roots. Before television routinely tackled subjects this difficult, before limited series was even a common phrase, there was this. An 8-part adaptation of Alex Haley's novel tracing his own family's history, from an ancestor's capture in West Africa through generations of American slavery to eventual emancipation. LeVar Burton, in his first major role, plays Kunta Kinte, and the series became one of the most watched television events in American history, with its final episode drawing an audience that, at the time, was one of the largest in the medium's entire history. Here's what makes Roots one of the most culturally significant pieces of television ever produced. It forced a mainstream American audience, many for the first time, to confront the brutal, specific reality of slavery in a way that had never before reached that scale of viewership. Not as an abstraction, but as a multi-generational family story, with names, faces, and genuine emotional stakes. The series won multiple Emmy Awards and is widely credited with sparking a nationwide surge of interest in genealogy and African American history that continues to this day. Nearly 50 years old, still one of the most important pieces of television ever broadcast. Number 4. Mare of Easttown. Mare Sheehan, a small-town Pennsylvania detective investigating the murder of a teenage mother, while her own life is falling apart in almost every direction at once.
You get this son of a bitch. Because if you don't, I'll kill him myself.
Brad Inglesby created this 7-episode HBO series, and what elevates Mare of Easttown beyond a standard small-town murder mystery is its total commitment to place. Easttown feels genuinely, specifically lived in, a community where everyone's business is everyone else's business, where the murder investigation keeps colliding with decades of buried resentment and unaddressed grief that has nothing directly to do with the case itself. Kate Winslet plays Mare Sheehan, and this is, by wide consensus, the finest performance of her career. No vanity, no glamour, just a specific, tired, stubborn, deeply lovable person trying to hold together a job, a family, and her own grief while solving a murder nobody else can crack. And when it cracks, it will blow your mind. I've recommended this show to people who don't watch crime dramas. They always come back and say the same thing. I didn't expect to feel that much. Warm, devastating, and one of the finest character studies disguised as a murder mystery ever made. Number 3. When They See Us. In 1989, 5 teenagers were coerced into false confessions for the assault of a woman in Central Park. They were between 14 and 16 years old. They were innocent. They spent between 6 and 13 years in prison before the actual perpetrator confessed after 13 long years.
The female jogger was severely beaten and raped.
Every black male who was in the park last night is a suspect. I need all of them.
Ava DuVernay directed this 4-episode series, and it does not soften a single moment of what happened to these 5 boys. The interrogation tactics used against children, the media's role in convicting them before any trial began, the specific machinery of a system that decided their guilt before it looked at a single piece of evidence. The performances across this series are extraordinary at every level. The young actors playing the boys as they're first arrested, and the adult actors, including Jharrel Jerome in an Emmy-winning performance as Corey Wise, who plays the character across both his teenage interrogation and his years of adult incarceration in a single, continuous performance that never once breaks. The series faced real-world consequences for its subject. Donald Trump, who had taken out full-page newspaper advertisements in 1989 calling for the death penalty for the 5 teenagers before their trial, never retracted that position even after their exoneration. DuVernay's series makes that context part of the story without ever needing to editorialize about it. This is, by a significant margin, one of the most important pieces of television ever produced. It received widespread critical acclaim, multiple Emmy Awards, and remains one of the most vital pieces of storytelling about the American justice system ever made. If you watch nothing else on this list, watch this. Number 2. Chernobyl. Jared Harris, Stellan Skarsgård, and Emily Watson lead this 5-episode HBO series, dramatizing the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster and the desperate, often reckless cover-up that followed, from the initial explosion through the extraordinary human cost of the cleanup effort. Craig Mazin wrote this, and the level of technical and historical accuracy achieved is extraordinary. Actual nuclear scientists and historians have praised the show's precision in depicting the physics of the disaster and the specific bureaucratic failures of Soviet institutional culture that made the catastrophe so much worse than it needed to be. Here's what makes Chernobyl one of the finest pieces of television ever produced. It turns a story about radiation, physics, and institutional bureaucracy into one of the most tense, emotionally devastating pieces of television ever made, without ever sacrificing the accuracy of what actually happened. For a period following its release, Chernobyl became the highest-rated television series ever recorded on IMDb, surpassing shows with far larger and more established fan bases. Jared Harris's performance as Valery Legasov and the series' devastating closing courtroom monologue about the cost of lies remain some of the finest moments in television history. It won the Emmy for Outstanding Limited Series and is now taught in film schools as a case study in adapting technical, scientific material into genuinely gripping drama, a definitive, era-defining piece of television. Number 1. Band of Brothers. Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. From training in Georgia to the D-Day jump into Normandy, through the Battle of the Bulge, to the liberation of a concentration camp and the final collapse of Nazi Germany. Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks produced this 10-episode series based on Stephen Ambrose's book, following the real men of Easy Company through the entirety of the Second World War. Damian Lewis plays Major Richard Winters, a genuinely reluctant leader who becomes one of the finest officers in the entire United States Army, almost entirely because he refuses to ask anything of his men that he isn't willing to do himself. What makes Band of Brothers extraordinary isn't the scale of the battles, though the D-Day and Bastogne sequences remain some of the finest combat filmmaking ever produced for television. It's the specificity. Every episode opens with the real veterans themselves, elderly, speaking directly to camera, grounding everything that follows in the fact that this actually happened to actual, ordinary young men, most of whom just wanted to go home. Won 6 Emmy Awards and a Golden Globe for Best Miniseries. Cost over $125 million to produce. Still one of the most expensive television productions ever made. 25 years later, it remains the standard that every war miniseries since has been measured against. This is not just the best miniseries on this list. It is, by the estimation of critics, veterans, and audiences across 2 decades, the greatest television event ever produced. That's the end of our today's list. 15 miniseries, the best ever made. Now, I want to hear from you. What's your all-time favorite miniseries? Is there one you think absolutely deserved a spot on this list? And if you could replace one of my picks, which one would it be? Let me know in the comments. And if there's a specific type of recommendation you'd like to see next, tell me that too. I read the comments, and I'll promise I will reply to every one of you. And if you genuinely like the video, please like, subscribe, and swipe left on the comments and hype this video. It really helps a small channel like mine grow. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.